I grew up believing my parents were strict but loving. We weren't rich, at least that's what they always told me. From the age of 16, I worked part-time jobs after school, waitressing, babysitting, even scrubbing floors in an old motel. When I asked why I had to work so much while my friends had allowances, my mom would say, "We just don't have that kind of money, honey. You need to learn responsibility." By the time I turned 21, I was exhausted. College was out of reach, student loans were piling up, and I often skipped meals just to pay rent. I remember one winter, the heating in my tiny apartment broke, and I wrapped myself in 3 layers of sweaters, shivering, thinking, why didn't my parents ever help me, even with a little? It wasn't just about money. It was about how they treated me whenever I asked for support. My father would scoff and say, "Life is hard. You'll thank us one day for making you strong." And like a fool, I believed that maybe all this suffering was for my own good. But deep down, a quiet resentment started to grow. Every time I saw my parents go on a vacation, buy new furniture, or casually mention a surprise gift for my younger brother, I couldn't help but feel like something wasn't adding up. And then on my 25th birthday, I received a letter in the mail, one that would unravel everything I thought I knew about my family. The envelope was thick, with an official seal. At first, I thought it was another bill or maybe some bank statement I had forgotten about. But when I tore it open, I found a letter from a law firm in my city. "Dear Ms. Carter, as trustee of your late grandfather's estate, we request your presence regarding a financial matter in your name." My hand shook as I read the words again and again. Grandfather, estate, financial matter. I barely knew my grandfather. He had passed away when I was 12, and while I had some vague memories of his warm laugh, he had never been a big presence in my life. My parents never talked about him much either, always saying he hadn't left anything behind. Curiosity burned through me, but also dread. I called the number on the letter and scheduled a meeting for the next morning. That night I barely slept, tossing and turning, wondering what it could be. Maybe some old piece of land? A small savings account? The next day, I sat in a cold conference room across from a gray-haired attorney. He slid a thick folder toward me. "Your grandfather set up a trust in your name when you were born," he explained. $5 million. It was to become accessible when you turned 21. My vision blurred. I could barely breathe. 21. I was now 25. For years of starvation, of humiliation, of sleepless nights working double shifts, when there had been $5 million sitting in my name all along. And then the attorney added the words that made my stomach drop even further. "Your parents have been the custodians of the trust until now. They had full access." The words hit me like a punch. My parents, custodians of the trust. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. "Wait," I said, my voice trembling. "Are you telling me they knew about this? All this time?" The attorney looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and professionalism. Yes, they were appointed as trustees. It was their duty to protect and eventually transfer the funds to you when you turned 21. But as of our records, they never initiated the process. My mouth went dry. My entire life, I had been told we had nothing, that I had to earn every cent, that asking for help made me weak. Meanwhile, they had been sitting on millions that were supposed to be mine. I felt dizzy as I signed some papers, officially transferring the control of the trust to me. When I walked out of that office, the city streets seemed unreal. People bustled around, cars honked. Life carried on as if nothing had happened, yet my entire world had collapsed and rebuilt itself in a single morning. By the time I reached my apartment, anger had replaced shock. I called my mother. She answered cheerfully, as if nothing was wrong. "Hi, sweetheart. Did you get my text about dinner on Sunday?" I didn't bother with small talk. "Why didn't you tell me about the trust?" There was silence. A long, heavy silence. Then she said softly, "So you found out." My chest tightened. She didn't even sound surprised. She knew this day would come. "Why?" I demanded. "Why would you let me go hungry? Work myself sick? Drop out of school when there was money all along?" Her sigh was calm, almost rehearsed. "Because, darling, we didn't want you to grow up spoiled. Money ruins people." I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. That was their excuse? Her words echoed in my head like poison. Money ruins people. I almost laughed. "Spoiled? Mom, I've worked since I was 16. I've gone to bed hungry. I couldn't afford textbooks. I had to quit college. Do you think that's what spoiled looks like? Her tone hardened. You don't understand. Your father and I managed that money carefully. We invested, we paid for family expenses. It was for all of us. My knees nearly buckled. For all of us. It was in my name. It was mine. There was a pause, and then my dad's voice joined the call, calm and steady like always. Listen, kiddo. We knew if you had that kind of money too young, you'd blow it. You'd waste it on some silly dream. We did what was best. Best for who? My whole life, I had felt like I was barely holding things together while they carried on comfortably. Suddenly, so many little details clicked. Their vacations, the new car my dad bought, my mom's expensive jewelry she claimed was from a thrift store. The betrayal stung sharper than any poverty ever had. You lied to me, I whispered. You watched me struggle, cry, beg, and you lied to me. My father's voice grew stern, like he was scolding a child. Watch your tone. Don't forget who kept that money safe all these years. Safe. That word made me want to scream. Safe in their pockets, safe while I scraped by on pennies. I'm done, I said finally, my voice shaking but firm. I don't want your explanations. I don't want your excuses. You stole my life from me. And before either of them could reply, I hung up. For the first time in years, I didn't feel powerless. But I also didn't feel free, not yet. Because I knew this was only the beginning of what I was about to uncover. I didn't sleep that night. My mind kept spinning through memories that now felt twisted and false. All those times my parents had told me we couldn't afford it. When I needed braces and they said, "Too expensive, just smile with your mouth closed." When I begged to join a summer program abroad in high school, and my mom told me, "That's for rich kids, not for us." When I cried over dropping out of college because my part-time jobs couldn't cover tuition, and they shrugged, saying, "Maybe higher education isn't for everyone." Every single one of those moments had been a lie. Not only could they have helped me, they were legally meant to. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the papers from a lawyer. The trust fund details were clear. My grandfather had specifically written that the money was to ensure my future. College, career, stability. He'd wanted to protect me. He must have known something about my parents that I hadn't understood back then. The next morning, I went back to the law office to ask questions. The attorney looked at me with genuine pity. "Your grandfather was very explicit," he said, flipping through the documents. "He trusted your parents to manage the funds until you came of age. But technically, they weren't supposed to use it for themselves. It was to remain untouched, aside from reasonable expenses for your benefit." My stomach turned. So, if they spent it on themselves, vacations, cars. That would be mismanagement. Possibly even fraud, he admitted carefully. But proving it would be difficult. Families rarely pursue legal action in cases like these. It can get messy. Messy. That word made my blood boil. As if messy could capture the years of humiliation, hunger, and exhaustion I had endured while they lived comfortably off my inheritance. Walking home, I thought about confronting them face to face. But a part of me wanted to see for myself just how far they had gone. So that weekend, I drove back to my hometown unannounced. The moment I pulled into their driveway, I knew the truth. The house I had grown up in, once a modest, creaky place, was completely renovated. Fresh paint, a brand new deck, expensive cars gleaming in the driveway. My parents weren't just comfortable. They were thriving. When my mom opened the door, she froze, her smile faltering. "Oh, sweetheart, you didn't say you were coming." I stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. The living room was filled with luxury furniture, the kind I had only ever seen in magazines. My father walked in, wearing a designer watch that probably cost more than my rent. I couldn't hold it in any more. So this is where my future went. Into leather couches and fancy cars. My mom's face tightened. My dad set his jaw. "You don't understand," he said firmly. "Everything we did to protect you. Money changes people. We didn't want you to lose yourself." I laughed bitterly. Lose myself? I nearly lost everything because of you. You let me starve. You let me work myself sick. You told me I wasn't good enough for college. Do you have any idea what you've done to me? For a flicker of a second, I thought I saw guilt in my mother's eyes. But then she straightened her shoulders and said, "You should be grateful. If it weren't for us, that money might be gone by now." At least it's still there. Still there. As if that erased the years of pain. I stormed out of the house, my parents calling after me, but I didn't turn back. Driving away, I realized something. They had stolen 4 years of my life. Maybe more. And if I didn't act now, they'd keep stealing from me in one way or another. I wasn't going to let that happen. I spent the next week in a fog, but wasn't the helpless kind I'd known in the past. No, this was different. This was fury sharpening into focus. Every time I remember the years I'd spent counting coins to afford groceries, I felt the rage burn hotter. My grandfather had wanted me to have opportunities. He had trusted my parents to protect my future, and instead, they had clipped my wings and convinced me I was unworthy of more. I decided I needed to know the full scope of what they had done. I called the law firm again and requested copies of all records tied to the trust. Transfers, withdrawals, anything that could show where the money had gone. When the packet arrived, I sat on the floor of my apartment with the papers spread around me. It didn't take long to see the pattern. Payments for luxury renovations, tuition for my brother's private school, vacations in Europe, business expenses that lined up suspiciously well with the timing of my dad's new car. And then I saw something that made my hands tremble. A transfer of nearly $500,000 marked as a personal investment fund under my father's name. My inheritance wasn't just misused. It had been outright stolen. I felt sick. My parents hadn't just kept me disciplined. They had lived their dream lives with my money, while I believed I wasn't good enough to deserve help. That night, I stared at myself in the bathroom mirror, whispering out loud like a vow, "You will never control me again." The next step was confrontation, but I didn't want another screaming match. I wanted evidence, clarity. So, I asked the attorney if it was possible to audit the trust. He hesitated but eventually agreed. "If you really want to pursue this, we can begin an investigation," he said. The thought of suing my parents made my stomach twist, but what twisted it even more was the image of myself working 3 jobs while they sipped wine on a beach in Italy. I drove to their house again a few days later, this time prepared. My father met me in the driveway, his expression stern. "You can't just keep showing up like this." I held up the documents. "Then maybe you shouldn't have left a paper trail." He froze, his face paling slightly. My mother appeared behind him, clutching a glass of white wine. "Sweetheart, please." "No," I snapped. "Don't sweetheart me. I know everything. The trips, the cars, the so-called investments. You took money meant for me and used it to buy yourselves a better life. Do you know what I went through while you were spending it?" My father's jaw clenched. "We gave you character. You're stronger because of it." "Stronger?" My voice cracked. "I almost lost everything. I thought I wasn't worth anything. And the whole time, you had the power to change it. You chose not to." For the first time, my mother's mask slipped. Her eyes welled with tears, but whether it was guilt or fear, I couldn't tell. "We did what we thought was right," she whispered. "No," I said coldly. "You did what was right for you." I turned and walked away, leaving them standing on their pristine lawn, their perfect house behind them. That night, I opened a new account and transferred every last cent of the trust into it. It was mine now, truly mine. But even as I sat staring at the balance, the hollow ache inside me grew. The money could buy me freedom, comfort, even opportunity, but couldn't give me back the years I had lost. And it couldn't erase the truth. My own parents had betrayed me in the cruelest way possible. The following weeks felt surreal. For the first time in my life, I wasn't panicking about money. Rent, bills, groceries, they were no longer heavy weights on my chest. But instead of feeling relief, I carried a strange hollowness inside me, like my entire identity had been ripped apart. I realized how deeply my parents' lies had shaped me. I had believed I was poor, unworthy, destined for smallness. I had believed that my failures were proof I wasn't capable enough. Now, staring at the balance in my account, I knew none of that had ever been true. But the worst part, the money couldn't fix the scars. I still woke up in the middle of the night panicked about overdue bills. I still caught myself rationing food even though I could afford a full fridge now. Poverty had been burned into my bones, all while my parents drank champagne on vacation. I decided I needed answers, not just about the money, but about why. Why had they been so cruel? Why had they stolen my future? I reached out to my aunt, my mother's younger sister. We weren't especially close, but she had always been kinder to me than my parents. When I told her what I had discovered, there was a long silence on the other end of the phone. I always suspected something, she said finally. Your mother, she was jealous of you. That shocked me. Jealous? Of what? I had nothing. You don't understand, my aunt continued. Dad, your grandfather, always adored you. He said you reminded him of himself when he was young. He was the one who insisted on setting up that trust. Your mom hated it. She thought he was playing favorites. When he passed, and the responsibility fell to her and your father, I think she saw it as her way of taking back control. Her words made my stomach twist. So it wasn't just greed. It was resentment. My own mother had envied me since I was a child. After I hung up, I sat in silence, replaying my life with new clarity. My mother's sharp criticisms, the way she dismissed my dreams, the way she always favored my brother, it all made sense now. She hadn't wanted me to succeed. She had wanted to prove I couldn't succeed. That night, I wrote in my journal for hours, trying to put words to the betrayal. I wrote about the nights I went to bed hungry, about the humiliation of working 3 jobs while my classmates built careers, about the years lost to struggle that could have been different. By the time I put the pen down, my hand was shaking. I couldn't let this fester in silence. I needed closure. But closure wouldn't come from yelling at my parents again. Closure would come from taking back the power they had stolen. So I made a decision. I scheduled another meeting with the attorney, not to audit this time, but to discuss legal action. The look on his face said everything. This will be difficult, he warned. They're your parents. The courts don't like to intervene in family matters unless there's clear fraud. There is fraud, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. And even if I never step into a courtroom, I want them to know I'm not their victim anymore. They don't get to hide behind the word family. Not after what they did. As I left the office, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time in years, I wasn't the helpless daughter scraping by. I was the woman with proof, with power, with nothing left to lose. And my parents were about to find out what that felt like. The next confrontation wasn't planned. It erupted like a storm. I had barely pulled into the grocery store parking lot when I spotted my parents' car. I froze at first, debating whether to turn around, but something inside me snapped. I was tired of hiding, tired of letting them spin their lies. They were loading bags into the trunk, my mom laughing at something my dad had said. For a moment, I saw them not as my parents, but as strangers, 2 people who had stolen from me, and smiled while doing it. I walked straight up to them. My mom's face dropped when she saw me. My dad stiffened. We need to talk, I said, voice low but steady. My father's eyes narrowed. This isn't the place. Perfect place, I shot back. Because I want you to hear me without hiding behind your house, your wine glasses, your fake explanations. I have the records. Every withdrawal, every transfer. You didn't just manage my trust, you plundered it. Other shoppers were glancing at us now. My mom's cheeks flushed. She hissed, lower your voice. No, I said firmly. For once, you don't control the narrative. You used $500,000 for Dad's investment fund. You paid for renovations, vacations, jewelry, while I starved in a freezing apartment. Do you remember me calling you, begging for help to pay tuition? Do you remember what you said? We just don't have the money, honey. Her lips trembled. My father tried to step in. You don't understand how hard it was for us. We had bills too. Responsibilities. Bills. I laughed bitterly. You had bills. I had survival. Do you even know what it feels like to choose between food and rent? To cry yourself to sleep because you think you're too much of a burden to ask your own parents for help. My mother finally snapped. We did what was best. You would have wasted it. Stop, I cut her off, my voice breaking. Don't you dare pretend this was for me. You didn't keep me disciplined. You kept me desperate. And you loved it. You loved watching me crawl while you thrived off money meant for me. For a moment, her mask cracked. I saw guilt, or maybe just fear of being exposed. My father grabbed her arm, muttering, "Get in the car." But I wasn't done. Listen to me. I'm done being your victim. I've spoken to lawyers. There will be an investigation. And whether or not you ever face a judge, you'll face me. Every time you look at me, you'll remember that I know exactly who you are. They got into the car without another word. My mother couldn't even look at me. As their car pulled away, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from release. For the first time, the power wasn't theirs, it was mine. That night, I went home and opened my laptop. The transfer confirmations were still on the screen, proof of their betrayal. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, this ends with me. Their control, their lies, their poison, it ends here. And yet, even as I said it, I knew this story wasn't over. Because cutting ties with your parents isn't as simple as walking away. It's a wound that doesn't stop bleeding just because you found the knife. I thought the hardest part was over, finding the truth, taking the money, telling them I wouldn't be their victim anymore. I was wrong. The real battle began the moment I decided the betrayal wouldn't be swept under the rug. I filed the paperwork with the attorney to request a formal audit of the trust. It wasn't a small thing to do, opening a legal case against your own parents. People warned me, friends, a distant cousin who'd heard the whisperings, but the hollow that had lived in my ribs for years had finally grown teeth. I wanted accountability, not vindication. I wanted the record to show what happened, so it couldn't be buried again. The first meeting with the forensic accountant felt like walking into a different world. Numbers that had been warm and friendly when I used to imagine my future became cold and accusatory. Ledgers, wire transfers, shell company names that linked back to renovations, polo club dues, and that investment fund my father had bragged about. The accountant traced purchases, correlated dates, and built a roadmap of choices that mapped directly from my trust to my parents' lifestyle. When we presented the findings to my parents, they attacked the messenger. "This is harassment," my father said, voice low and dangerous. "You're trying to humiliate us," my mother added, eyes hard, swallowing whatever guilt might have shown before. I expected anger. I didn't expect how small I'd feel for making them small. So many people still said, family matters should stay private. But private was the word they'd used to hide theft. Social pressure arrived in the form of relatives who suddenly called me ruthless and neighbors who said I was causing a scene. Even some of my friends suggested I let it go. Who wants to spend time in court when you can have a quiet settlement? But quiet never fixed anything. Quiet keeps secrets alive. The settlement offer came in a bland envelope, a carefully calculated amount, a non-disclosure clause, and, of course, the promise that if I signed, no one would ever know the details. They offered enough for a comfortable life, but I imagined the hush money slipping into the same pockets that had fed on my youth. I folded the paper and put it aside. "Take it," my aunt told me in a trembling voice. "It'll save you the pain." She had been the only family member who didn't blink away when I spilled the ledger pages across her kitchen table. "But they'll never change," she added, like a warning and a benediction. I didn't sign. We took it to court. The courtroom was a theater of grief and small triumphs. My parents hired 2 lawyers who spoke in calm, polished sentences meant to sting less than the truth. They painted themselves as honest caretakers who'd made necessary decisions for the good of the family. I watched them and felt a cold, precise anger. This wasn't a story about mistakes. It was a story about decisions made at my expense. Days of testimony followed. Witnesses I hadn't expected, an old bank manager who had noticed odd withdrawals, a contractor who remembered cash payments, stepped up. My attorney cross-checked receipts against vacations my parents had boasted about. Each time their lawyers tried to spin a narrative, the evidence clicked into place like final pieces of a puzzle. During a break, my father found me alone in the hallway. He wasn't the polished man behind the podium. He looked smaller, older, and suddenly mortal. "Do you want me to tell you why?" he asked, voice breaking where it never had before. "Your grandfather and there were obligations." I thought. He stopped, a man running out of rehearsed lines. I felt nothing but the memory of frozen nights and humiliating refusals. "Why not tell me?" I said, the words coming out sharper than I planned. "Why let me suffer when you could have lifted me?" He had no answer, only the scrape of a chair, the shuffle of paper. When the judge read the ruling weeks later, it was nuanced. Mismanagement and breach of fiduciary duty were found. My parents were ordered to repay a substantial portion of what had been taken, plus interest. There were penalties and restrictions placed on their control of any remaining family assets. The court didn't and couldn't give me back the nights I ate cereal for dinner or the classes I'd foregone. What it did give me was consequence, a public record that said in formal language that their choices were wrong. Outside the courthouse, cameras zoomed in like hungry insects. The The story leaked through family channels into the neighborhood. The people who once tut-tutated over my ambition now turned their heads. My childhood friends sent messages, some supportive, some cold, and a cousin reached out to say he'd always suspected something but had been afraid to act. The ripple effect was messy and human. I used the returned funds to stabilize my life, pay off student loans, save, and invest. But I also did something less tidy. I started therapy. The sessions were the slow, dirty work of reassembling a self that had been trained to feel unworthy. I learned how to shop without panic, how to let someone else pay for dinner without calculating debts in my head, and how to sleep without hypervigilance. Yet even in those quiet improvements, a question husked at me like an ember: forgiveness. Could I forgive people who had stolen the years I couldn't get back? Could I rebuild a relationship with the people who birthed and betrayed me? I didn't have an answer then. What I had was a life that was finally mine, and a legal judgment that gave me room to choose how to shape the future. The hardest work was just beginning, healing, and deciding whether mercy could ever live next to memory. The judgment didn't end the story, it only closed a chapter. When the court ruled in my favor, I felt relief, yes, but also something heavier. Winning against your parents is not the same as winning against strangers. There's no victory lap when the people who raised you are the same people who betrayed you. The silence afterward was deafening. My parents refused to speak to me directly. Instead, I heard through relatives that they considered me ungrateful, that I had humiliated the family name. They spun the narrative, painting themselves as victims of a vindictive daughter. I stopped defending myself. The documents spoke for me, and those who chose to ignore them weren't worth convincing. Instead, I turned inward. Therapy became my anchor, teaching me that my worth had never been tied to the lies I was fed. For the first time in my life, I began to dream without shame. I re-enrolled in college, not because I needed to anymore, but because I wanted to. I traveled not to escape poverty, but to see the world with new eyes. I built friendships that weren't transactional, people who valued me without conditions. The trust fund, what remained of it after court and legal fees, was no longer just money. It was a reminder of resilience. I invested wisely, but I also donated part of it to programs supporting kids from disadvantaged families. I knew what it was like to feel abandoned, and I wanted to make sure someone else didn't have to. One evening, while watching the sunset from a quiet beach, I thought about my grandfather. I finally understood what he'd tried to give me, not just wealth, but choice. Freedom. A life that wasn't dictated by the selfishness of others. As for my parents, I don't know if forgiveness will ever be possible. Trust, once broken like that, doesn't regrow. But I no longer carry the weight of needing their approval, and that is its own kind of peace. My story isn't about money, it's about reclaiming myself. And that, in the end, is worth more than any inheritance.